what you really want to be doing is looking at the lifetime value of that tenant and making sure that you're not paying more to get that move in than you actually end up capturing. Let's say we bid a multiple of 10 and we only can get a multiple of 5 out of that tenant. We're actually losing money. We're bringing in somebody, we're losing money, it doesn't work. Welcome everybody to the Self-Storage Income Podcast. You've got me, Connor Skeen, hanging out with you today. Thanks so much for joining in, hanging out with us. The support throughout the years has just been absolutely incredible. We were looking at downloads and listens and all the things the other day, and it's amazing to see this self-storage podcast just blowing up, going crazy. It's so exciting to see. Happy to be here. I know AJ and I really pride ourselves on, getting on here, sharing information with you guys, welcoming you to our inner circles, all of those things. And it's amazing. We're always talking about the rising tide lifting up all ships, right? So you guys listening in, downloading all the information, going out, utilizing it, finding your own facilities, going and working with firms, getting facilities, all that kind of stuff. It's amazing to see. So excited. Today, you've got me hanging out. AJ's off doing something cool and fun. I'm not sure what it is, but he's busy today nonetheless. So we're going to hang out. We're going to run through a few things. Me being heavily focused on the operations side of things, I wanted to jump in today and just share with you guys some insights on seasonality. What do we look at when we're looking at facilities, at employees, so on and so forth, when we look at seasonality and how those things change throughout the year and impact us, especially in the regions that we're in. Something to take away and to think about as well is there's a lot of regions throughout the United States that might not be impacted by such heavy swings in seasonality. So just remember, as you're always looking at microeconomic factors in these different areas that you're in, when you're analyzing properties and you're looking at things to buy, when you're analyzing those markets, also be analyzing, what's the weather like? What's the busy season? What's the slow season? Is there any of that? Because you're going to want to plan for those things. I'm going to lay out some of the things today that we generally plan for and look forward to each and every year as just standard operating procedure. This is what we do in most of the markets that we're in. But again, these things can vary differently between what market that you're in, what facility is where. Location's a huge thing, and those factors that impact it. Again, weather's another big one. So let's get started. Let's kick it off. First and foremost, we're going to talk maintenance. So maintenance is one of those things that obviously is going to have some big ebbs and flows when it comes to seasonality. You think of fall, spring, winter, all the things that are going to impact your facility and the operations of that facility. So one of the things that we really focus on is, it sounds kind of like a small thing, but it's a big thing. HVAC. HVAC systems are super duper expensive. Those are one of the things that you want to always have your eye on from a preventative maintenance standpoint. So you've got some kind of contract set up with an HVAC service company that's coming out on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, whatever that is, providing service to those HVAC units, changing filters, doing any of that kind of stuff. Or you just have some kind of an employee that you've hired to do some of those specific things that's qualified to do that, if that's the way you want to run it. But HVACs are so expensive. Preventative maintenance, ongoing maintenance is huge to make sure that those things are in optimal condition in the springtime and the summertime when it's the hottest, and in the cold seasons when it's the coldest. The last thing you want to have happen at a facility, and this could just be like your office, right? It wouldn't even have to be a temperature controlled facility or any of that. You want to make sure that you have those systems in place because you might run into scenarios where it gets so cold, you don't have the HVAC up and running like it should be, and you end up having pipes freeze and burst, and then you have this insurance claim and months of time to try to get an office back together or an interior of a facility. Like, it's a total disaster. So we like mitigating disasters as much as we possibly can. So make sure you're getting the HVAC serviced. Another special note as well, HVAC system wise in general, this is more for temperature controlled facilities. Again, if you have an office, the size of the office really could, if it's not huge, it might not have an impact, as big of an impact on your facility as it does on a temperature controlled facility. But keep an eye on those thermostats. you really want to make sure that you don't have your thermostats cranked up to 80 degrees throughout the entire winter time. You want to have them, in the 50s to 60s range, in the winter time, and then in the summertime, you really want to bring that. You don't want to obviously cool it to, if it's 100 degrees outside, you don't want to be trying to cool that interior space, these massive interior spaces, that is, to 60 degrees or 65. If you can cool it to a nice comfortable 80, like 85, cool, that'd be great. Definitely feels a lot better than 100 degrees outside. So just make sure that you're keeping a close eye on those thermostats in any temperature controlled facilities that you have, making sure that those things are constantly being updated and monitored every single week, because things happen all the time, whether it's somebody getting in and potentially changing it, whether it's an employee, or if it's not a lockable thermostat, you might end up having a tenant or somebody gaining access to it and changing it, which is another thing as you're acquiring facilities. Something to keep in mind are those kinds of dynamics. Is there access to thermostats? Is there access to some of this infrastructure that you really don't want tenants to have access to, or even employees? You want to be able to control it remotely. So a thermostat is a prime example. There's so many options out there to get these fancy new thermostats in the day and age that we live in, that you can just control completely remote. They're lockable, all that, like nobody can touch them. You can check in on them regularly, all of those things. So super, super important to make sure that all of that stuff is done from an HVAC standpoint. Maybe you're buying your first facility, maybe you're a seasoned veteran, whatever that might be, you're gonna need property management software, and that's where Tenant Inc. comes in. They are going to be your solution, the top solution in the self-storage industry. I'm telling you guys, this technology has been developed by self-storage owners and operators just like us here at Self-Storage Income, who have had a say in how this technology has been built, have played a huge part in it, and it is one of the most robust and usable and actionable and valuable tools in regards to property management that you could ever utilize or find in the technology realm and all things self-storage. So be sure, check out Tenant Inc. Link is in the show notes. Next up, what I want to talk about is landscaping, groundskeeping. This one's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. You're going to have the leaves falling and coming back on. You're going to have snow removal and the different things. You're going to have a lot of these aspects going on throughout a lot of regions in the U.S. That you're going to really have to pay attention to and make sure that you have in place prior to the time that you need them. So, like I just mentioned, snow removal, ice control, all of those things, anything that has to do with winter, we generally like to get those things set up. And what I mean by that is we like to get those contracts set up and set in place for the winter time to have our snow and ice removal done by September at the latest. Because if and when you end up having a year of heavy snowfall or ice or whatever that is, and you haven't set those things up yet, you don't have the contracts in place, and you're calling these contractors like, hey, I got all this snow, can you come remove it? Like, yeah, cool, after the 14 other people I got to get to today. So you want to be able to get those contracts in place, be able to have priority, make sure that your customers, your employees, if you have them, have access to that facility and can utilize it when they need it. So huge on the snow and ice removal portion. Something else, obviously, you want to really make sure that you've got all the contracts in place for the landscaping, just generally speaking, where you want to have ideally one point of contact that's going to be doing, and a lot of firms will do this, they'll do the snow removal, they'll do the landscape maintenance and the lawn mowing and the tree trimming and shrub trimming and all the different things in one spot. And if you can do that, that's one of the things that we like to do. We like to consolidate contractors just to make sure we've got one point of contact. If we've got 4, 5, 6 different guys that we have to talk to for every single property and every single facility, that really causes a lot of operational drag, where if we could just send one email like, hey, Tom, like, we need to make sure the grass is green in this area, that just makes things so much more streamlined. So something to think about as well as you're acquiring properties, whether it's your first one or it's your 10th, really start to focus, or always have a focus on scalability and efficiency. Whether or not you're planning to grow and expand and get crazy and build empires, whatever it is, Why would you not want to make it as streamlined as possible for you guys as owners and operators? That's the name of the game. Operational drag is a huge thing, and it's really hard to quantify as well, as far as how much time and effort and energy you spend doing things that maybe you wouldn't have to do if you were just set up in a different way. So make sure that you've got those contractors in place that are doing those things consistently. We've seen major issues with landscaping, even just, it was a few years ago, actually. It was, we had this facility, and this was before we had done a lot of changes in how we were operating and managing. And there was a facility that was kind of off on its own. It was not in like a super remote place or anything like that, but it didn't have any resources close by. Nobody had been to the facility for a few months to really check in and see how things were going. And we had somebody from the management team show up, and the place looked like it was just a disaster. It looked abandoned. It was crazy. Weeds were growing up super high throughout the facility. It looked horrific. And so to get that all squared away, this is probably about 5 years ago at this point, but to get that all taken care of was about $11,000 at the end of the day, which was a ton of money to have somebody come in, get all that stuff taken care of, get it back to even a remotely reasonable level of quality. It was an insane amount of money, and that money could have been used for any number of improvements for the facility. It could have been deployed elsewhere and reinvested. I mean, all the things. You think of all the opportunities that, $10,000, $20,000 that it might cost to fix a problem. If that was just reallocated somewhere, what could you truly do with it? That's when it really hurts, when you start recognizing those things. And with that particular instance, had we just had the proper processes in place, the contractor in place to do what they needed to do, we wouldn't have had that issue. And this is something to also keep in mind, because when you're looking at contracts and you're setting these things up with each and every contractor or vendor that you're working with, make sure that you're getting good and competitive pricing. You're going out, you're getting your estimates and your proposals and everything from these contractors, and verifying that you're getting competitive pricing. But don't look at that pricing and then just say, like, no way, like we're not going to do that. It's too expensive. Again, you want to make sure that you're acquiring a facility and operating one that can sustain those operating expenses that the facility is going to require. If you're not going to tie those things in and you're not going to account for that, you're going to end up spending more on the back end if you don't just invest in it in the front end. So if I don't invest in the front end on that quality landscaper, that's my one point of contact, that's going to do an amazing job and manage things well, I'm going to pay for it on the back end by having facilities that look like junk, having 4 people I got to try to track down and coordinate with and get things corrected. I've got to have all that manpower that I'm using to do those things. You look at all of it as a whole. Invest in the good contractors, in the good contracts, do things right. Don't try to band-aid stuff. Do things well. With that said, I want to move on to a couple other things. We talked a little bit about like the physical asset itself. I want to talk about behind the scenes a little bit, because there's some things that we do operationally speaking behind the scenes that really help impact and drive the facility's performance through these seasonal changes that we generally see. So typically in a lot of the areas and regions that we're in, we have this seasonality. We see, March, April, we start seeing a ton of move-in activity, right? You got people out there, consumers, they're moving, they're buying homes, they're doing all this stuff. Springtime, summertime, it's time to do all that, right? So you start seeing that busy season coming in March, April, and then it really starts to taper off like September, October. It starts to kind of decline, and then, December, January are pretty slow for the most part. So that's typically seasonality, how we see renting, move-ins, some of that. We also see during the slower parts of the season, we'll see about a 10%, maybe 12% decrease in occupancy, totally normal. But that's also kind of planned as well. We don't actually we try to maintain occupancies to a certain degree, but like we've talked about on other podcasts, is you've got occupancy and you have revenue. Both of these things are very, very important to have first and foremost, you need the occupancy, right? You have to have the occupancy there to then be able to drive and manage revenue, both with the street rates and the in-place rates. But I really kind of want to focus on the in-place rates right now when we're talking seasonality, because what we'll do in these slower seasons with that decrease in occupancy that we expect, what we'll do is we'll strategically manage rates a little bit more aggressively. We'll deploy different strategies to extract more revenue out of the in-place rates. That way, when we're losing the occupancy, we're maintaining the revenue as best we can. So ideally, we might lose some occupancy, but we might maintain or even actually exceed the revenue that we had previously. So that's a really, really good thing to keep in mind as you're going into the slow season, into the busy season, how those things might ebb and flow and what you can plan for. Another really important thing that comes to mind when we're talking about move-ins, seasonality, and just getting consumers in the door, renting a unit, and getting them into your facility so then you got that occupancy so you can start managing that revenue, is the marketing dollars. So let's say you've got a marketing budget that you've put together. You're spending X amount on Google, X amount on Facebook, whatever that might be. Or even, traditional marketing. You might be sending out mailers, might be doing some of those things. What we generally will do is we also adjust our marketing budgets throughout the year to fit with the competition, to gain leads and to attract customers as those ebbs and flows of the season change. So as things get less and less competitive in the slow season, generally speaking, what we'll do is we'll actually decrease our marketing budgets. So we'll see a decrease in those marketing budgets throughout the slow season, because what we want to do is we want to hold on to all of that where, we don't have a lot of activity, we're not a ton of leads coming in, all that kind of stuff. We want to reduce the amount of money we're spending from that overall annual budget for those periods. Whereas when competition gets really strong in the summer seasons and our quote unquote busy season, then what we'll do is we'll have the extra budget at those points in time to actually start spending more, let's say on a weekly, monthly basis for those time frames. So let's say all said and done, we've got a $10,000 budget for the year. We'll use maybe a couple thousand of it beginning of the year, and then we're going to use a ton of that, 10,000 throughout the busy season, maybe a couple, thousand at the end of the year, kind of a thing. So just something to keep in mind as you're going through the seasons. You want to be looking at your marketing budgets. You want to be looking at the activity that you're getting, the rental activity, and adjusting those budgets. And then as you go through, as you start leasing up the properties, or if you have a facility, you really want to start looking at when you're getting to that stabilized occupancy of 70, 80 plus %, you really want to start looking at some of those budgets again and say, okay, do we need to dial this back? Do we need to dial that back? Or do we need to get more aggressive for these unit types or those unit types? So just at a high level, those are some things to really think about and consider, because there's so many, you've got these third-party platforms that are out there that refer leads to you that you then are able to capitalize on. Think of it like Expedia, right? So you're going to Expedia, you're looking at all the deals that you can find for hotels and travel and all that stuff. It's the same thing, but for storage. Somebody's going to a website, they're looking something up, and they've got all the different storage facilities there with the unit that they're looking for. And to rank on a lot of those systems, you have a bid essentially that you've input into your system to say, hey, I'm gonna bid to get placed. I want to rank 1 or 2. I want to rank 3 or 4, whatever it is, and it'll show you what you need to bid essentially to get to that spot. And when you do that in these really competitive markets, we've seen bids that are totally insane. And something to really keep in mind, actually, I was talking to the team today. I want to get one of our teammates, Jesse Harmon, in to talk a little bit more about marketing. But one of the things, again, just kind of touching on this as we're touching on seasonality, marketing, ebbs and flows in that regard, something that you really want to keep an eye on is that lifetime value of your tenant. Because if you are on these platforms, and whether it's Google or it's a third-party referral source, whatever, and you're bidding, let's say, 9, a multiple of 9, because you're bidding on a multiple of value, right? And so let's say you're bidding on a multiple of 9 for a specific tenant, but those tenants will generally only stay for 5 months, let's say, just for an example. What you really want to be doing is looking at the lifetime value of that tenant and making sure that you're not paying more to get that lead, to get that move in, than you actually end up capturing. So if you pay for, again, let's use that example. Let's say we bid a multiple of 10 and we only can get a multiple of 5 out of that tenant as far as their value and that month-to-month value that they give to us. We're actually losing money. We're bringing in somebody, we're losing money, it doesn't work. So we end up, we don't do that, obviously. We look at our lifetime value, these consumers of our tenants and the specific unit types and say, okay, how much can we spend to get a lead for that specific unit type? Okay, it's gonna be $100, cool. We'll spend $100 to make sure that we can get the $1,200 that we'll get from that individual moving in, because their lifetime value is $1,200, right? So look at those average length of stays, look at the lifetime value of the customers. Super, super important when you're talking marketing budgets and what you're willing to pay for a tenant to come into your facility.
Are you a new self-storage investor and want to know what that facility is worth, what the risk is, how to underwrite it? Well, that's exactly what we do in a feasibility study. A feasibility study, we actually look at the market for you. We look at the finances, the underwriting, we show you where the upside is, the downside, and all the risk. That is actually what you can provide to banks to get capital and investors. It's a big worksheet which most banks actually require. So if you want to know what a storage facility is worth that you're looking at, come to us, follow the link in the show notes, and we will tell you.
Next up, employees, the fun stuff. Employees I want to touch on a little bit, because if you have them at your facility, you'll find that they're really, really busy in the busy season, right? Again, we're talking seasonality and changes. They've got all these people moving in, there's auctions, there's all this stuff going on just day to day. What are they going to do when that's not the case? What's your plan? And a lot of times what we like to do, and this is a couple things I want to talk about that kind of tie in together. What we like to do is we like to default to training. That's one thing. So in those times, in those off-season times when they've got a little bit more time, that's our time to deploy new things and to train them on it and to focus on some projects that maybe we didn't want to do during the busy season, if that's testing new technology or if it's deploying a new process, any of that stuff. Because one of the last things that we want to do, again, talking from experience, one of the last things that we want to do is launch something in the middle of a busy season where everybody's running around with their hair on fire and we're like, hey guys, like here's this new amazing thing that's going to make your lives so much better. And everybody's like, dude, are you kidding me? I've got 14 other things I got to do today, 48 people I got to get back to. Like, what are we doing? Thanks for the help, but it's actually hurting me. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on during those slow times. We want to have a plan for those employees. Default to training, default to implementing new processes, procedures, technology, whatever it is. Fantastic time to do that, and really wanted to be able to share that with you guys. And then also, just from a overall organization, not just talking about employees and their utilization and what they're doing, day to day and what that looks like. We really focus on process, deploying new technologies, deploying new procedures, all of that in the slow season as well. So in-house, we've got our home office and we've got all our employees around the country that are out, doing all the things every day, doing amazing work for us. We don't want to detract from them during the busy season when they've got all the things that they got to do. So what we'll do is, and we don't want to detract because obviously all of that stuff flows up as well. We have a lot of things going on in our systems and in day-to-day activity just throughout that we have to try to manage each and every day because we're so busy. There's more things to deal with. There's just more touch points. Things are a lot more complicated. So in those slower times, in the slow season, that's really when we like to sit down. We have more meetings. We talk about more initiatives, and we deploy more of these things. We just today actually deployed a huge initiative that we've been looking at for a number of years. has to do with payment processing, some of these different things. But would we have done that in the busy season? Absolutely not. That's not something we would do. Again, there's going to be some there's going to be some times that might make sense for you where it's a sink or swim type thing, where it's like, no, we have to change this system right now. And that's just the nature of the beast. If you have to do something, obviously do it. Don't sink the ship. But if you can, in any way, shape, or form, wait to deploy a new process, a procedure, the technology to change something for you, your team, whatever that might be, do that during the slower season. Capitalize on that and make sure that you're not overloading your team, overloading yourself, causing unnecessary and undue stress. Just do it in the slow season and you'll be great. Use that downtime to truly just double down, refine on what's working and what's not. That's another really, really important thing to think about, is this idea of when to do something new versus just doing more of what you're already doing. And one of the mottos that we like to have around here is to do more, do better, and then do new. This is something that we actually, I've downloaded from Alex Hormozy. And what that really means is, like, don't just go off and it's like, oh, shiny object, we're going to go do this new sexy cool thing over here. Let's actually look at everything that we're doing right now that's really driving the business. What's the 20% that's driving the 80, right? And how can we just double down on those things, refine them, do more of them, make them better, and truly maximize all of those things to their utmost potential before we entertain anything new. And again, there's going to be some cases that it might make sense to just go and do this new thing because there's no refining what exists. There's going to be times, but for the most part, when we look at it, that's how we like to look at it. We say, let's do more, let's do better, and then we can look at the new. Something just to keep in mind as you grow, as you start to implement things. And again, as discussed at the beginning of the podcast, really look at the scalability. Are you building systems for right now? Are you building systems for the future? You really, really want to make sure that you're building your operations, you're building your business in a way that allows it to function without you. Because at the end of the day, something might happen to you. You might end up wanting to sell at some point. And if all the value is just consolidated with you as the owner, like you really want to take those things into account and make sure that you're planning accordingly. Building your business in a way that can function without you is super, super important. And that way you're not bottlenecking yourself, you're not bottlenecking systems, any of that. It's a really, really important tool to think about. Again, just scalability as you're jumping in and building those things out. With that said, I wanted to leave this episode short and sweet for you guys today. Just give you some insights into some of the seasonality that we look into. Make sure that you guys like and subscribe here on YouTube. Make sure that you are also leaving us those awesome reviews. We had, I think AJ's talked about this, we had hundreds and hundreds of reviews. I think it's Apple Podcasts nowadays, but back in the day when we called it iTunes, on Apple Podcasts that ended up, for whatever reason, being removed or taken down. I don't know. They thought that was totally impossible for somebody to have such a successful, amazing podcast with so many amazing reviews. I don't know. But with that said, please leave those reviews. AJ and I love jumping in here, doing this stuff. If that's truly our only ask of you guys, I hope you guys can help support us in that way. We truly, truly appreciate you guys listening in, all your support throughout the years. Keep doing what you're doing out there. We love seeing it. Keep sharing your stories, reaching out to us with your questions, leave your comments, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much for listening.